Today on EcoSense for Living, we look at the history of air quality in America and find out why some have made clean air their #1 priority. The Clean Air Act wasn't passed until 1970, but it was inspired by a tragedy that happened in Pennsylvania decades earlier.
The town of Donora, Pennsylvania, was a small mill town nestled in the Monongahela Valley around the horseshoe bend of the river. And it was a steel town, and it was known for steel production for many years. And I grew up there. And when I was growing up there were two things people never talked about. And one of them was pollution, and the other was the Holocaust. Back when I was growing up, they were considered too horrible to ever mention. So I never knew that the place I grew up was polluted. And I went away to school. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I came home one day and I said to my mother, "Mom, was there another town with the same name as ours?" And she said, well, why are you asking? I said, well, I read at school that there was a town called Donora and it was polluted. Is there another Donora, maybe in Mexico or something? And she got kind of quiet and she said, sit down. She said, well, do you remember how you couldn't see the sun for days at a time? I said, yeah. Well, she said, I guess she said, today they would call that pollution, but back then it was just a living. And I began to do research then about what had happened in Donora, about how the steel industry wrote press releases promising they were going to clean things up and how everything would be fine, only it wasn't. This particular incident that I wrote about in my book had to do with what happened in October of 1948 in one 5-day period of time, when the combination of coke ovens and steel mills and rolling ovens and blast furnaces and the coal stoves that heated our homes created this mix of toxic pollution. And in one 5-day period of time, 20 people in this small working class town dropped dead. I suspect it had to do with zinc smelting, because the process of zinc smelting releases a highly reactive gas of fluoride, just for milliseconds. And fluoride gas is what was used in World War II. Fluoride has no smell. That's why it was so insidious. That's why it could kill people, because you can't smell it, you can't see it, but it can, in fact, kill you. The funeral homes ran out of caskets, and the florists ran out of flowers, and the drugstores ran out of the drugs to treat whatever they could for respiratory disease. So they knew there was a horrible problem, and it even made the news on Walter Winchell as a national story that there was a death plume in Donora. That's what happened in that period of Halloween, 1948. What happened in Donora was that air pollution over a short period of time killed a few people. And it raised the question, which many had been raising all along, if a large amount of pollution can kill a small number of people in a short period of time, what happens to lower amounts of pollution over longer periods of time? And so it really gave birth to the whole field of environmental epidemiology, that is, trying to understand the patterns of health associated with patterns of environmental pollution. And Donora laid the groundwork for that. So in the beginning, the first thing they did, of course, was to try to study the problem. Now, it's always been a lot easier to study a problem than it has been to do anything about it. Whether it's tobacco or asbestos or air pollution or even cell phones, you study the problem, you see if there's a pattern in health, and then you try to address it. After the Donora smog, the investigators came in. They tried to do a study of Donora. The investigators were run out of town by people with handguns. And then when I tried to find the records of what was left of the investigation, I found that they had burned in a mysterious fire. Right? That's one way to deal with it. After Donora, you had London. In London, what they did is they wrote a report that went in a drawer. that surfaced only later in the British government's history. And that report warned that if the conditions of Donora ever hit London, thousands would die. That's what's the warning, it's in that report. And that's exactly what happened. In London, in December of 1952, a major smog settled upon the city. 1 million coal-fired stoves, when smoke ran like water, were flowing chimney smoke. London is in a bowl, just like Donora was. The smoke couldn't dissipate like a lid on a pot. It was just trapped in this low valley. And during that time, people got sick and people started to drop dead, including healthy young people. My theory of the London smog is that it was the combination of the diesel fume from the double-decker diesel buses just introduced, plus all the coal stoves, that created this condition where people were dropping dead in the street. Eventually, really almost 20 years later, this gave rise to what became the Clean Air Act, because the federal government recognized that they were having a problem, and this was driven by what happened in California. Because you see, in California, people were also getting sick with asthma and respiratory disease, and the levels of pollution were getting to be so high that you had women protesting in the streets. Middle-class women wearing gas masks, pushing baby strollers, a pretty scary thing for politicians. So the governor of California went to the public health people and said, I want air pollution standards. They came up with standards for what they thought were the major pollutants. And those standards that they set in California in the 1950s are still being used as the framework for how we set standards all over the world today. We do have less air pollution in the United States today than we've had before. Now my big fear, having been in Mumbai, having been in Chengdu and Shanghai and Beijing and other large Chinese cities, is that there are small Donoras all over the world today, but nobody's counting. What we're missing is some of the newer, more toxic forms of pollutants, some of the nano pollution, for example, which is 100 times smaller than a human hair. That technology we have no standards for, and we're not addressing it. You see, the very ultrafine particles that are so small, they get into the lungs, we breathe them in if they're very small, and then they can get into the bloodstream. They can slip into the bloodstream. And when they get into the bloodstream, they can actually make your blood stickier. It's called serum viscosity. So now we know there is actually a relationship between air pollution and stroke and heart disease, as well as some forms of dementia. All of these things have been associated with air pollution. So what you breathe in doesn't just affect your lungs, but the smaller the particles, the more broadly it's distributed throughout the body, it can have an effect on any system. There is a clear connection between air pollution and climate impact. And we have to recognize that and recognize that when you put your foot on that accelerator of your SUV, you may be making your daughter's asthma worse. And there is a clear relationship to how much we consume fossil fuels and what we're doing to our local environment and our global environment. I think that people have to get informed and get involved. Nobody can sit on the sidelines anymore. And you can't really be motivated if you don't have information. So first, get better informed about what things you are doing that are making air pollution worse. You don't really want to burn wood in your home unless it's for survival. Anytime you burn any hydrocarbon, you are releasing known carcinogens. It's really important to recognize that. You want to make sure your stoves and everything are operating at peak efficiency and that you're using the cleanest form of energy that is available to you at the time. Like most scientists, I tend to be enthusiastic about technology, and I think there are some opportunities for more efficient fuel burning. And right now, renewable energies are almost cost competitive in some areas, even without the subsidies. What we know is there's a global circulation of air pollution, certainly with respect to climate policy. There is no question, and this is embedded in both the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Accords, that it's responsibility of the developed countries to encourage and support developing nations in their efforts to be more fuel efficient and to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels that they do burn. We only got one planet, and therefore efforts have to proceed around the world to encourage energy efficiency and cleaner, greener, more efficient burning of whatever we have to burn, and frankly, shifting away from fossil fuels altogether. I'm really encouraged by this younger generation of children that are coming up with an awareness of the need to recycle and reduce our use of all sorts of things. And that's what's going to make the difference.
Many parents have started defending the environment in their own backyards. Mom's Clean Air Force has united their efforts.
I live about 30 minutes north of Pittsburgh in Butler County, and this area has a lot of rolling open spaces along with shopping centers and things like that nearby. It's a typical suburban area.
We're very fortunate to live here in the community of Stony Brook in East Orlando. It is a middle-class community and it's very family-oriented, and the schools are great.
The reason you move to the suburbs, the reason that you move to residential areas is the safety and knowledge that you'll be around other houses and other kids and not have to worry about your proximity to something that could cause cancer in your children.
I have two boys, and one is 14 years old and the other is 12 years old. We're very active. My kids are in sports, and I'm their biggest cheerleader for sure. I became concerned about fracking when it came to southwestern Pennsylvania. I remember reading about it happening in Washington County here in southwestern Pennsylvania, and I remember thinking to myself, my gosh, this is really kind of disturbing. These people are living in these areas, and we really don't know what this industrial activity, how it's going to impact them.
We live close to a power plant, the Curtis Stanton power plant that uses natural gas and coal to generate power. It's just a little bit over a mile from my home. And I'm a water resources engineer. I'm also an artist, an environmental activist, and a mom. My daughters, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, Alana and Valerian. They love to play outside, but I'm concerned when they're out there playing because I don't know what's coming out of that power plant and how it could be affecting their health. I have seen and I've heard about more and more kids in our community getting sick with issues such as cancer. 2 classmates of my daughters passed away from DIPG, a very rare form of brain cancer. So we're really concerned about the impacts of air pollution on their lives today. So that's why I got involved with the Mom's Clean Air Force.
This is an industry like no other. So when drilling comes in, what happens here in Pennsylvania is many people own what's called their mineral rights. What people are able to do is they can lease out their mineral rights to oil and gas. And they're exposing the community to all of the negative health impacts that are happening from it. So it divides communities.
The well pad is located very close to Emmerling Park, which is one of the parks that we use all the time in our community for soccer games and softball games. My children have both played on those fields. There's a wonderful little creek just at the bottom of the hill from the well pad where my children have spent numerous hours playing with crayfish and having a good time in the water.
I found out it came to my community 3 days before our school board was going to vote on signing a lease. And it was a shocker. I didn't know it was coming to my community. And the only way that I found out is because it was going to be voted on. As parents, we banded together and we created a petition and got 900 signatures within those 3 days saying, we just don't think this is safe to be near our children where they go to school. There have been explosions related to oil and gas, and so that is a real concern from pipelines, from all of the infrastructure and things around it. We asked the school board to vote down the lease, and thankfully they did. But we knew that it wasn't going to stop that well pad, the part that is above ground. We knew that that would not stop it from happening. It was sited a half a mile away from our children's schools.
Many people are just as concerned as I am about where this well pad's placed, its proximity to schools and parks and our children. You know, a lot of kids these days have a lot of asthma and upper respiratory issues that people are very concerned about. My own son has had issues with wheezing and upper respiratory things that make me very concerned about where it's placed.
A recent investigation by the local NPR affiliate about a year ago, they found that the biggest polluter in this area by far is the Curtis Stanton coal power plant. And they've had about 5 million pounds of air releases between 2012 and 2016. They've also had some violations of both the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. With regards to the Clean Air Act violations, they were for particulate matter and carbon monoxide. Even if other chemicals, hundreds of other chemicals, are under EPA limits, moms like me are concerned about their synergistic toxicity, how that's going to affect our children's health. We know that many of these chemicals bioaccumulate in fatty tissue, and they can cross the placenta, making our kids sick even before they're born.
As parents, we continue to band together, and that's extremely important to find your support system.
I would say the community has been very receptive to the idea that industrial processes belong away from residential areas.
What we did is we educated ourselves. Each of us had our own roles, and we had somebody who was very good with politics, who showed us how to meet with legislators, with our local elected officials. We had somebody who was really good with media. We had somebody who understood law, who understood the local ordinances. My role was the science role. So I love science, and I dug in. I wanted to understand fully how this would impact my children. And so what I did is I went to very reliable sources. I went to what was at that time published in peer-reviewed studies. I wanted the information to say it was safe. I wanted that because I was fearful of what the implications would be, but all I found were issues that were concerning, adverse health impacts. What I found out that really brought me to my knees was that there is benzene found in and around the well pad. Now, benzene is a potent neurotoxin, but also causes childhood leukemia. My son had leukemia when he was 3 years old, not related to oil and gas. But I made the promise between me and God that if he got through it okay, that I would protect. That I would work to protect other children.
My two daughters, Alana and Valeria, they have been to DC with me. They have met their congressmen. They have seen democracy in action, how common people like us, common folks, can go and get and meet with our congressmen and talk about our concerns. Before I joined the Mom Clean Air Force and other environmental activism groups, I was in deep despair over the state of the planet. But thanks to organizations like Moms Clean Air Force, now I have some hope. I feel like action is an antidote to despair and depression. And I feel that democracy is alive and well, and we just have to use it.
I don't believe that anybody has an agenda to go out and hurt children. I want to believe better in humanity. The thing that holds me in there is my support group. I have a wonderful support of people that I work with, moms, and also I have a large support within my community.
We live here. This is our home. We don't have the luxury to just pick up and move away and distance ourselves from this. We have to be responsible with what we're doing, and I think a lot of people in the community feel very strongly that that's really important.
So this is still a work in progress. It's a painting showing my two daughters outdoors in a very dry area, as you can see, but there's a little flower growing, and it shows hope that we can stave off the most catastrophic prediction from climate change. You can see also the power plants in the background and how that's going to impact their lives in the future. I'm titling it, Where Will the Children Play? Change is not going to happen in a vacuum. Change can only happen when enough of us protest, march, call, and demand our elected officials to be accountable for pollution and to put our kids' health and the health of the planet first.
Could electric cars really solve one of our biggest pollution problems?
As population has grown, so has transportation pollution. And that's primarily because our transportation system for the last 100 years has really been powered by petroleum. So the more people we have driving around, the more cars, the more oil we're using, the more pollution we're creating. And one thing we need to do is transition away from oil in our cars and move to a cleaner fuel. And electricity is becoming a more viable option. Electric vehicles offer a lot of benefits to consumers. One is that you never have to go to a gas station ever again. You can plug your vehicle in at home, it can charge overnight when you're not using it, and be ready for you the next day. Typically, on average, American drivers drive about 30 miles per day. The latest models of electric vehicles can travel over 200 miles on a single charge, which means you'd have plenty of range for your typical driving.
Okay, so if I go out to purchase an electric vehicle today, what sort of incentives will there be there for me?
There's a federal incentive currently, a federal tax credit of $7,500 for an electric vehicle. And in addition to that, there are state incentives depending on where you live. So over the past 9 years, we've seen really an explosion in the number of electric vehicles available to consumers. There are over 40 models that are being manufactured by companies that are offered in the United States. There are some vehicles that are luxury vehicles. They're very expensive. But we're also seeing a lot of new vehicles coming out that are more affordable and have long vehicle ranges. The range is how far the vehicle can travel on a full charge. So basically like a full tank of gas. There are numerous models coming out that can go over 200 miles on a single charge and are in the $30,000 price range. Now, $30,000 is a lot of money for a new car. The average new car last year cost $36,000. So we're getting into the price range for these vehicles that is in line with other gasoline vehicles. The importance of incentives is that we're still at a point where a comparable gasoline vehicle is going to be cheaper when you go to the dealership than an electric vehicle. And those incentives help to get more consumers to have access to clean electric vehicles that can save them money at the gas pump in the long run. If all of a sudden every car and truck on the road today was an electric vehicle, we would see pollution from cars and trucks drop by about 50%. The great thing about electric vehicles is they actually get cleaner as they get older. And the reason for that is because many states have adopted policies to move forward in cleaning up the electricity grid.
Say we have an electric vehicle and we open up our energy bill, or will we be just stunned when we look at it?
If you're not ready for it, you might be, but you have to compare that to the amount of gasoline money you were going to spend on gasoline that month. It's going to be a lot lower than that. There are a lot of utilities around the country that are offering special rate plans that give you very low cost electricity at night. So that could mean even lower costs and more savings.
So will the automobile companies keep doing the right thing? Do you think they'll still proceed with making more fuel efficient cars?
One of the biggest disappointments has been the auto industries and the auto companies and their trade associations' efforts to weaken the vehicle fuel economy and emission standards. They've lobbied the administration to reopen the standards, and now the administration has proposed basically freezing them. And the auto industry could choose to do the right thing, but doing the right thing would be ensuring that these standards stay in place. So as much as the auto industry is talking about its investments in electric vehicles, it's saying that that's the future of the industry. But at the same time, they're resisting standards that are going to push all the companies in that direction and ensure we're actually getting the emission reductions we need So they're really speaking out of both sides of their mouth.
What's our greatest opportunity in transportation right now?
Greatest opportunity in transportation right now is really threefold, and some experts are calling this the three revolutions. One is electrification. Transitioning away from oil to electric drive vehicle technology is happening now. Another is automation. We've seen lots of headlines about companies investing in self-driving cars. And then the third is the sharing economy. Basically allowing people who are connected can share rides and reduce the number of vehicle miles that are being driven. So these three revolutions could address three major problems that we're facing. One is the pollution from a transportation system. Another is the traffic and congestion that our cities are facing around the country. And the third is safety. Over 30,000 people died in highway traffic accidents last year. That is an enormous number of deaths that don't need to happen. Electric vehicles are the future, but how fast we get there depends on how much support and effort we put into it. And we're really looking to federal and state leaders to ensure that that happens at a rate that's consistent with avoiding the worst impacts of climate change.